Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit more thorough with this book review because it covers a topic that's a bit more controversial, and the response to it, I'm sure, is very very mixed. The book is called Strange New World. It's got a pretty long subtitle that I'll probably mess up, but the author is Carl Trueman, who is a Christian historian, and basically this book it's about the philosophical ideas that have influenced what our modern sexual ethic is. And so um, it's uh, presented as a way of being descriptive, but it is very clear throughout the book that it's more, the tone of it is specifically trying to explain how it is that we're able to justify our modern sexual ethic, specifically the LGBTQ movement, things like pornography, which it kind of all clumps all together, and things like that. And so it's very clear that it's coming from the stance of an evangelical Christian who is trying to explain why these sort of, quote, insidious ideas have seeped into our modern culture, and we are now thinking in the ways that we do, and the sexual ethic has been what it is. And so of course you can tell that this is people are going to be split over this, right? A lot of maybe evangelical Christians or conservative Christians will really enjoy this book. They do. And you got a lot of people who are really going to hate it. And so what I have to say is it is also clear that the author, he doesn't do any sort of explaining about why he believes what he believes about a sexual ethic. So he's writing to a particular audience who agrees with him. And so this idea of what is moral in terms of sexuality is sort of assumed. So that's not part of the discussion. What he's really doing is he's trying to try to explain why it is that our society has changed in modern thinking to allow us to get to this point where we have the LGBTQ movement and same-sex marriage and, again, pornography and things like this. And so I think I would say, in terms of rating, if I were somebody who agreed with Carl Trueman on this issue, I'd probably, like people that I know, rate this book like a 9 out of 10. It was, pretty well written. I do think that he was very clear. I think that he explained certain things pretty well, and he had some helpful conclusions at the end of his chapters. So, in terms of how it was written, and if you agree with him, it's perfectly fine. As it is, I think I would probably rate this more like a 4. And I'm going to give some of the reasons as to why I think that. I would give it a 4, first of all, for the reasons that I said. It was a well-written book. It was very clear. But I think there are a variety of things that are problematic. There are 2 major issues with the arguments, 4 kind of problematic underlying assumptions and aspects to his thinking here. And then there's 1 really problematic outcome of all of this. So the first major issue is this idea that's central to his work, where he calls expressive individualism. And so he talks about philosophers such as Rousseau and Descartes and others who have kind of built out these ways that have influenced our modern understanding of what the individual is, and what's important about us making moral decisions. And basically this is the idea that I have a particular identity and I make choices and I act on what I believe that identity to be. And so this again is largely descriptive, but you can tell kind of the implication here. The point that he's making is the reason that you have people like same-sex couples, they choose to act on their desires and their feelings because we have this idea in our society that it is morally right to act on the things that we desire, to act on what we believe to be our identity. And the implication is that this is somewhat of a bad thing, and that's really kind of disingenuous, and that is sort of a cherry-picky argument. Individualism does have some negative outcomes, but it's not all bad. For example, even me as a cisgender straight person, I make choices about my sexuality that people like Carl Trueman would not have a problem with, um, and that's just the way that it is for really a lot of what we do in our lives. I mean, you have the kids growing up on a farm. They don't necessarily stay on the farm their whole lives and help as hands there. Some might choose to go to the big city and get a job as a journalist or something like that. And so these are individualistic choices that we make in our society that are not necessarily bad. I think it would be very sort of a cherry picky argument to say that the the negative aspect of individualism is specifically focused on these people, such as same-sex couples or the LGBTQ community, and they're only making these decisions out of a selfish individualism. So that's just that's not a good enough argument overall. The other major problematic thing with this, the argument of the book, is he connects a lot of these atheistic ideologies, largely talks about, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud and others, and he makes a connection between that and the modern justifications for our sexual ethic. And this is cherry picky. It's certainly not, the atheistic ideologies are certainly not the only thing that are influencing people like, the LGBTQ community. And I mean, for example, John Locke, right? John Locke's ideas about rights is a major aspect that influences our modern society. So everybody should have certain rights. But also, there are good aspects of these thinkers, like Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, that are a part of our modern society. A major theme amongst these guys was empowerment, right? Marx believed in empowerment of people to overcome the oppression of the elite, and Nietzsche believed in empowerment to overcome being controlled by religious ideas. So that's a good thing. So the point being, there's not just the bad things that are influencing the specific sexual ethic. The specific sexual ethic could be influenced by various things, and that could be good or bad in our modern society. So that's not a helpful argument either. It's also important to point out that while it is true that these thinkers did heavily influence the just kind of philosophical milieu of our modern culture, um, again, those aren't the only things. And certainly the reason that, for example, a same-sex couple decides to be together, that didn't just emerge since Freud, right? Like, it wasn't just Freud's idea that we should act on our sexual desires, that people have started to make certain decisions. Um, and again, you could certainly just say that Carl Trueman is simply trying to describe the philosophical justifications for our modern sexual ethic. But again, this is simply, it's not complete, right? It's too simplistic to make this one-to-one connection between these particular things in modern philosophical thought and these particular things in our modern sexual ethic. Now, the few other things that I think are problematic in the approach to this discussion, at least by this author, I don't necessarily have time for all of it, and so just check for part 2 here.